If you're expecting a jealous little brother story, flip it. My brother David was the favorite, not me. He didn't envy me, he just seemed to dislike me for existing. From as early as I remember, our home revolved around him. My mother cooked David separate meals, folded his laundry, and treated his homework like a group project the whole family should submit together. "Help your brother," she would say, handing me his math sheets as if I were his unpaid tutor. I didn't receive the same care in return. I was the self-sufficient kid, quiet, bookish, tidy, and I leaned into that independence, mistakenly thinking it was a virtue everyone respected. It wasn't. It became permission to ignore me. Maybe I made it easy. I was blunt and literal, the kind of child who answered questions honestly even when the answer was inconvenient. My mother called it harshness, and I suspect she came to see me through that lens. The difficult one. David, by contrast, was loud, physical, and charismatic in the unruly way our dad had been as a teenager. He filled rooms. I tried not to take up space. At first his status as the golden child didn't bother me, but it grew teeth. David began picking me apart for sport. He mocked my height, my glasses, my love of reading. He'd snoop through my room, thumb my diary, and run to mom to report whatever sentence he could twist into drama. If I protested about privacy, my parents treated it like a joke. "Brothers tease," mom would say, smiling at the kid who had just weaponized my feelings for applause. It escalated. He snapped the arm of my glasses once and left them hanging by a thread. He sprinkled gross things into my food when no one was looking. Once he dropped tiny pebbles into my cereal. If I hadn't noticed, I would have shattered a tooth. When I told my mother, she said, "Boys bond this way." I started eating in my room. We went to the same school, which meant he knew the names the real bullies called me. Instead of stepping between me and them, he joined the chorus. Ugly. Loser. Hairy monkey. He'd hype them up, daring them to shove me around, laughing when I tripped or dropped my books. Another time, during an argument I can't even remember the origin of, he hissed, "Why don't you just kill yourself?" Most jabs I could wall off. That one found the softest part of me. I was already struggling mentally, and hearing it from my brother was like being kicked where I'd already been bruised. Dad worked long hours and wasn't home to witness most of it. When I complained, mom's reflex was to scold me for provoking David. Things finally hit the line in high school when David tried to set my hair on fire. It sounds like exaggeration until you smell singed hair. Mom still excused it as playing around. Dad didn't. For the first time, he saw the pattern and didn't look away. He told David flat that one more stunt like that and he'd call the police. It stunned my brother. Consequences had never stuck to him before. In that frozen moment, I saw it dawn on him that our father was serious. Later, Dad came to my room and sat in the doorway like he used to when I was little and sick. He said he'd spent years waiting for David to grow out of the cruelty, assuming it was a phase. Now he recognized it for what it was. "You've been dealing with a bully in your own house," he said. I felt my throat close. I told him everything about the pebbles in the cereal, the diary, the names, the shove and laugh routine at school. He went quiet in a way that meant something was about to change. The next day, he met with the principal. The bullies were warned in terms that made them pale. That evening, Dad did something I didn't expect. He drove me to a local MMA gym and signed me up. "You're smart," he said, "but you need to learn to carry yourself like someone who won't be pushed." I know how it looks, nerdy kid in a borrowed pair of gloves, but I had focus and a schedule. I split my days between studying and training, and slowly, my body stopped being just a place I lived and started being a place I could trust to protect me. The turn came on a random afternoon. We got small amounts of pocket money for chores, and I had saved mine for weeks. David slipped into my room and took it. I caught him outside, already mounted on his bike, friends waiting. I said, "Give it back." He smirked and said the only thing I was good at was running to Daddy. Something flared in me that training had been building toward without my noticing. I stepped forward and punched him. He stumbled, shocked more by the fact that I'd done it than by the force. I put a hand on his shoulder, took my money from his pocket, and let him drop back onto the grass. He started wailing. Mom ran out, took one look at his tears, and rounded on me. "You're the older one," she scolded. "You should be a role model." David, hiccup laughing through fake sobs, watched me get lectured like he was enjoying a show. When Dad came home, he didn't accept anyone's version on faith. He had us both explain. I told him David had stolen the money I'd saved. David said he needed it for a date and that, as his brother, I should help him. Dad's face didn't move. "You're lucky all you got was a punch," he told David. "Try stealing from anyone else and you'll meet a cop, not your brother." He didn't yell. He didn't grandstand. He just stated a rule that had always existed outside our house and, finally, existed inside it too. David waited for Mom to swoop in and reverse the verdict. She didn't have the leverage anymore. Dad held the line. When David realized no one was going to punish me for defending myself, he snapped, screamed that he hated me, and locked himself in his room. After that, he kept his hands to himself. He didn't apologize. David never apologized, but he created distance. We became uneasy equals. When our parents were around, he performed politeness. When they weren't, he muttered nerd and loser as he passed and refused to speak to me directly, relaying messages through our mother, like we were feuding diplomats. The older he got, the angrier he seemed, less punches, more contempt. If I asked a simple question, he'd walk away. If he needed something, he'd ask Mom to ask me. She told me to be understanding. I couldn't tell if this was puberty fermenting, or if the dislike ran that deep. I tried to fix it the only way I knew, by asking for a mediated talk. Can we all sit down and figure this out? I'd ask Mom. She refused every time. I'm not getting involved, she'd say, which was ironic, since she'd been involved from the start. Just always on one side. I counted the days until I could leave. I studied harder. I kept training. I earned a scholarship to my dream university, and Dad threw me a party. Even Mom looked proud for an evening. David lingered at the edges, saying little, glancing away when people congratulated me, like their words were a light he couldn't tolerate. Leaving for university felt like opening a window and discovering the whole time you'd been breathing through a straw. The first months were simple joy. Lectures I loved, friends who wanted nothing from me but time and jokes and late-night takeout. For the first time in years, I didn't brace for a voice behind me calling me names. I slept without listening for footsteps in the hall. I met Karen in my second year, at a party I almost didn't attend. A friend dragged me along, and there she was, funny, bright, religious in a gentle way that made her rules feel like choices, not weapons. We clicked. Where I was careful with words, she was fluent. Where I hesitated, she leaped. We built the kind of campus relationship that looks, from the outside, like two people who already know their answer will be yes. Our backgrounds frowned on kids outside of marriage. When we found out she was pregnant in our final year, we fast-forwarded what we already knew was coming and got married right after graduation. It was small, happy, and for a while, enough. Our parents smiled in the photos. Even David managed to look civilized. I believed Karen was the person I would come home to for the rest of my life. I'd always wanted monogamy, not out of fear, but out of preference. Plenty of women had shown interest over the years. I wasn't interested back. I had what I wanted. Marriage, of course, is a story written daily. Ours collected footnotes I didn't see at first. There were 2 betrayals, one intermittent affair with a married coworker that flared and cooled across years, and a brief relapse with an ex during a visit to her family. Each time, we separated. Each time, I forgave. I told myself we were young, that poor decisions didn't have to mean poor character forever. We tried again, and for a long stretch it felt like the reset had taken. Trust never returned to full brightness, but we lived as if it would. For years after the second betrayal, I had started to believe we'd made it to the other side. We were making plans. Then, 3 months ago, Karen sat me down and detonated my life with one sentence. She'd been having a long-running affair, and our son might not be mine. The room tilted. Words felt like gravel in my mouth. Asked why she'd kept it from me, how she could do that much damage and just sit there with dry eyes. Her answers were vague, strangely detached, as if she were describing weather that had passed through and left no trace. I pressed because I wanted the truth, not the fog. She gave me a name, David. And that is where everything you've read about my brother re-enters the story, like a ghost you never exorcised. When Karen spoke his name, I thought I'd misheard. My brother? The one who had made my life hell for years? She sat calmly, eyes rimmed with tears but voice level, and repeated it. David. What do you mean, David? She explained in a halting way, like someone rehearsing a confession. It started years ago, during those long holiday breaks when she stayed at my parents' house from Thanksgiving to New Year's. David, usually cold and distant with me, had been surprisingly warm toward her. At first, I'd been grateful. I didn't want Karen to feel unwelcome. She'd spend time with my mother in the kitchen, and she'd ask questions about the rift between David and me. I told her the truth. We'd never been close, and probably never would. Apparently, she took that as a challenge. She began including David in our outings. If we planned a movie, she'd suggest we invite him along. He'd always pick the film, and I'd sit through genres I didn't like just to keep the peace. I thought, naively, that this was progress, that maybe Karen could succeed where I had failed and thaw something in him. Behind my back, they built a friendship. She said it started when David confided in her about a breakup. He played the role of the wounded younger brother, and she the sympathetic listener. He flirted. She laughed it off at first. Then lines blurred. One night, when I wasn't around, it escalated. The image burned into my brain. My wife and my brother together made me physically ill. Karen admitted she'd felt guilty after and cut contact, which matched her abrupt departure at New Year's. I'd begged her to stay. She'd insisted on going home. At the time, I thought she was just homesick. 2 weeks later, she and I found out she was pregnant. She told me then that she didn't know who the father was, me or David. And she chose to stay with me because, in her words, I was the dependable brother. That was why we got married. My stomach turned at the cold calculation in it. I asked if this had all been in the past. Karen looked at me for a long moment, then shook her head. She admitted that the affair never truly ended. They had kept in touch, meeting in hotels, covering it with lies about working late or business trips. Half of her travel for the last several years had been with him. Why marry me if you wanted him? I demanded. She said she hadn't wanted to break my heart, that she couldn't picture me not being a father to Henry, that she hadn't known how to stop. I packed a bag in silence. She followed me through the house, crying, trying different strategies, pleading, accusing, bargaining. If you love me, you'll fight for us. Then, think of our son. He needs both parents. When I reminded her Henry might not even be mine, she sobbed harder and called me cruel. I walked out, checked into a hotel, and the next day, I drove to my parents' house. They welcomed me in, unaware of the storm. I told them everything, Karen's confession, the years of deceit, the possibility that Henry wasn't mine. The shock on their faces was raw. True to form, Mom's first instinct was denial. David would never, she began. I cut her off. Let me call him. Stay silent. Just listen. They agreed. I put the phone on speaker and dialed. David answered casually. Hey, what's up?
I didn't ease in.
Karen told me everything. The affair. The child. It was you. He laughed, quick and sharp, and denied it.
Called her a liar.
Said she was trying to ruin him. She told me details only you could confirm, I said. She admitted it all. That cracked him. He shifted from denial to blame, spitting venom about Karen's character, claiming women couldn't resist him, that he was the better-looking brother. He sneered. Who's going to believe you anyway? You've always been the loser. I'm the one they trust. I smiled without humor. Thank you for confirming, David. You just confessed in front of Mom and Dad. The silence on the line was thick. Then his voice faltered, stammering as he tried to claw back ground, blaming Karen, spinning excuses. Mom, in shock, demanded, David, is this true? He stumbled through weak justifications, every word digging the hole deeper. Then Dad's voice cut in, heavy with disappointment I'd never heard before. Give me the phone. I handed it over. Dad spoke slowly, each word precise. David, what you've done is more than a betrayal of your brother. It is a betrayal of this family. You slept with his wife. You kept it going even after they married. You have burned every bridge of trust. I raised you to value loyalty, decency, respect. And you have spat on all of it. David tried to interject. Dad continued. From this moment, you are cut off. No more college fund. No more financial support. You think being desired by married women makes you a man? Let's see what kind of man you are when you have to stand on your own without our money. The line went silent. Then Dad ended the call. I sat there, trembling but calm. Years of being gaslit and minimized, years of swallowing hurt, and finally the truth stood naked in the room. My father, who had so often aligned with David, had spoken a sentence I never thought I'd hear. Enough. Mom turned to me, eyes full of tears, and hugged me. For the first time in decades, I felt her choose me. She whispered apologies for not believing me, for excusing him, for letting it all go on so long. It was a moment my teenage self would never have dared imagine. Afterward, Dad promised to help me get a lawyer. Karen would be served papers. The truth would come out in court, where it mattered. And David, the golden child, was no longer golden. He was radioactive. The next few weeks were a handbook on how fast a life can be dismantled and reassembled. Dad put me in touch with a family attorney he trusted, measured, unsentimental, good at separating fire from facts. We filed for divorce. Karen hired a lawyer who came out swinging, demanding alimony on the grounds that I earned more. My attorney didn't flinch. We'll let the evidence speak, he said, and sent the subpoenas, hotel receipts, text logs, travel records labeled as business that matched David's off-campus disappearances. We agreed to a paternity test. Waiting for the results was its own kind of punishment, a limbo where every memory of Henry was suddenly fragile. The way he'd run across the yard and crash into my legs. The bedtime routines. The drawings with lopsided stick figures labeled Dad. I would reach for them and feel something inside me recoil, like my grief had a reflex. The envelope arrived on a Thursday morning. I stared at it on the kitchen counter for a long time, then opened it. Not the father. It was astonishing how simple the words were for how much force they carried. My knees didn't buckle. I didn't cry immediately. I just felt everything in me get very, very quiet, like the house had lost power. My attorney called. I read the result aloud. He was kind in the practical way that helps. "This will matter in court," he said.
I'm sorry.
We moved quickly after that. Karen's claim for alimony evaporated. Her lawyer pivoted to damage control. The affair, documented across years, weighed heavily. The paternity result settled questions a judge would otherwise have debated for months. The decree came through cleaner than I expected. But the law could not adjudicate the part that would not stop tearing. Karen called, more than once, to ask that I remain in Henry's life, for his sake. I wanted to be that man, the one who can separate the child from the betrayal. I tried, in my head, to build a bridge that would let me cross without bleeding. Every time, I saw my brother's face in Henry's eyes. It isn't fair. I know it isn't fair. But grief never promised to be fair. I told Karen I wouldn't be visiting. She called me cruel. Maybe I was. Maybe protecting yourself sometimes looks like cruelty from the outside. When the divorce finalized, the relief came not as celebration but as air returning to rooms I'd forgotten to ventilate. I signed a lease on a small place, clean lines, enough light, a kitchen big enough for one pan and one pot because I didn't feel like cooking for two anymore. Friends dropped by with plants and advice. I ignored most of it and watered the plants. Living alone felt like wearing clothes that finally fit. I woke to quiet. I went to the gym, to work, to bed, to places in between where no one expected me to manage their feelings. I did the single-person dance with the grocery cart and remembered I'm good company. Independence was not new to me. It was native ground I'd left for a marriage that hadn't been what I thought. In that small apartment, I could hear myself think. I slept. Then my father called one evening and said, "I'm changing my will." We were at his kitchen table 2 days later. He laid out binders, statements, numbers I'd never seen collected in one place. Decades of work, retirement accounts, a life insurance policy, the house. Added together, it came to just under $2 million. He said the words without flourish, "I'm not leaving anything to David." I looked up in surprise. "Are you sure?" "I am," he said, and there was a stubbornness in his voice that I recognized from every time he decided a thing was settled. I've forgiven him before for lesser things. This wasn't lesser. He betrayed you. He betrayed your mother. He betrayed the family we told ourselves we were. He explained the structure. Everything to me. $1 to David as a legal acknowledgement that would make contesting the will a steeper climb. If Dad died first, Mom would have the right to remain in the house as long as she wished, a life estate. My attorney would later call it, while ownership passed to me. "Your mother deserves peace in this house," he said. "Whatever David has done, she is still your mother." I told him I had no objection. I didn't want to own their porch swings or their memories, but I did want Mom safe. He nodded, relieved that we were aligned. Somehow, David learned about the change. I didn't tell him.
Dad didn't tell him.
That left one option, and I didn't want to investigate it. The phone rang the next afternoon while I was rinsing coffee cups. He didn't waste time with small talk. "I heard Dad's cutting me out," he said. His tone tried for casual and landed on desperate. "We need to fix this." "We don't need to do anything," I said. He pushed on. "College is killing me. Karen's on me about child support. Jobs are dry. I need help. Talk to Dad.
Talk to Mom.
Help me reset. You're my brother." I laughed before I could stop myself. Not a kind laugh. The kind that breaks a bridge and watches it drop. "You had a decade to treat me like a brother," I said. "You used it to make my life smaller and sleep with my wife." He switched tactics, the way he always did when charm failed. "You're being unfair. Karen's to blame too." "I agree," I said. "Which is why I divorced her. She's your problem now. So is the kid. They're the consequences of your choices. Not mine." His voice sharpened. "You can't do this to me." "I'm not doing anything to you," I said, calm because I'd practiced these sentences in my head for years. "You did it to yourself. And for the record, you are no longer the favored son. You are the man who slept with his brother's wife. That's what people remember." On the other end of the line, I heard something I hadn't heard from David since we were little. He started to cry. Not the performative whine he used on Mom. Real crying, heavy breathing between words he couldn't push through. "Everyone's turned on me," he said. "Grandma. The cousins. Nobody will answer my texts." "It isn't my concern," I said, not because I wanted to be cruel, but because I needed to say the sentence out loud, to mark where my life now ended and his began. "Do not call me again." I hung up and stood at the sink, hands wet, listening to the quiet of my kitchen like it contained an answer. It didn't. Answers aren't owed. Boundaries are. That night, I replayed the call despite myself. I am not proud of the small hurt I felt hearing my brother cry. Compassion is a reflex I've trained for years to keep. But compassion without memory is naivete, and naivete is what kept me in a marriage years past its expiration date. I would not apply it here. A week later, Dad called again to finalize documents. "This is what I'm doing," he said, and I could hear the iron in him. "If your mother talks to David behind my back, there will be consequences. I will not live with that betrayal twice." I didn't argue. I didn't encourage. I didn't need to. It was his decision to make, and if stubbornness is a family inheritance, we now knew which son had received it in the steadier form. I went to bed early that night, slept through my alarm, woke to light. For the first time in a long time, my future didn't feel like something I had to defend from the people closest to me. It felt like something I could build. I didn't ask how David learned about the will, but the answer knocked on the door anyway. My mother called the next evening, her voice too bright. She asked how I was eating, sleeping, whether I needed anything from the house. Small talk bloomed like camouflage. Then she sighed and said, "He's still our son." I let the silence sit. "Did you tell him?" I asked. Another sigh, softer, guilty. "He called and She stopped, and I heard the moment she remembered my father's line in the sand. Dad was in the doorway, keys in hand, listening. I put the phone on speaker. "If you're talking to David," he said evenly, "you need to stop. If you can't, then we need to talk about living arrangements." My mother gasped like he'd slapped her. "You'd throw me out?" "I'd end a marriage where loyalty only points one direction," he said. It wasn't heat.
It was a cold front settling in.
I meant what I said. I won't live the rest of my life refereeing his damage. She didn't argue after that. Later, when I went to pick up some old photo albums, she hugged me at the door, the way she had the day I left for college. "I miss who we were," she whispered. "We can still be better than we were," I said. "But that version requires boundaries." She nodded, and for once, the nod meant agreement, not dismissal. The house quieted. My phone stopped ringing with unknown numbers. The cousins stopped sending screenshots of David's latest pity posts. It was as if someone had shut off a valve no one had realized was leaking. Time lengthened in a new way after that. Life didn't become a montage. It returned to being a sequence of days you could actually feel. I went to work, came home, slept, ate, trained. I didn't attempt dating. The idea of letting someone in again felt like unlocked doors in a neighborhood I didn't trust yet. Instead, I booked therapy, the boring, necessary kind where you talk about patterns until the word pattern loses its shape and you're left with choices. Compassion without boundaries is self-abandonment, my therapist said once. I wrote it down and taped it inside a kitchen cabinet where I'd see it reaching for coffee in the morning. Karen tried one more time. She sent a text that was all soft edges, how Henry asked about me, how he'd drawn a picture with 3 figures and labeled one Dad. I stared at the phone until the screen dimmed. Then I typed a sentence that was true and cruel and human. "I'm not able to be in his life." I didn't add "for now" or "I'm sorry," because apologies would invite negotiation, and "for now" would become a door left ajar. I put the phone face down and went for a long run until the stitch in my side was louder than the ache in my chest. The update from David didn't come through him. It came sideways, via a cousin who still followed everyone's stories online. He'd dropped out of college. Money dried up. Loans became a cliff he couldn't climb. He'd moved in with Karen and found part-time work at a garage. "They're raising Henry together," my cousin wrote, then added a shrug emoji I chose to ignore. Good for them, I thought, and surprised myself by meaning it. If there was any version of this that could be called stability, that was it. I didn't bring it up with my parents, and they didn't bring it up with me. We found a new rhythm built on things that were ours alone. Dad, and I started golfing on Saturdays. He was terrible and competitive about being terrible. He swore at sand traps like they'd insulted his ancestors. We laugh the way men laugh when their hands are occupied and their hearts are getting something they needed without having to say so out loud. Work turned a corner I hadn't expected. I'd been grinding without looking up. Then one morning, my manager called me into a conference room and handed me a new title and a salary jump large enough to make me reread the email twice. "You've been steady through a storm," he said. "We trust steady." I didn't say. Steady is all I had left. I shook his hand and bought the team lunch. Evenings were quiet, but not empty. I cooked for one and learned how to make small plates that didn't feel like compromise. A perfect omelet, pasta that used 2 good ingredients and heat, fish that didn't need an apology. I read. I stopped doom scrolling. I slept better than I had in years. The apartment felt less like a stopgap and more like a place where a person lives on purpose. 5 months to the day after the will conversation, I was back at my parents' for dinner. We ate at the kitchen table that had absorbed every version of our family: birthdays, arguments, long silences, bad coffee, the occasional brilliant joke. Dad cleared the plates. Mom made tea. No one mentioned David. The quiet wasn't strained. It was dignified. I realized that silence can also be a boundary when it isn't a secret. After dessert, Dad said, "You know, I used to think fatherhood meant stepping in front of trouble. Turns out, Sometimes it means stepping aside and letting consequences walk through the door. He looked older when he said it and also lighter. On the way home, I drove past the park where I used to run drills for MMA after dark. There were kids on the grass trying to land cartwheels, teenagers looping on bikes, a father jogging behind a wobbly toddler who kept looking back to make sure the man would catch him if he fell. I didn't slow down. I didn't speed up. I let the light change when it was ready to change. To the people who ask why I don't see Henry, I wish I could give you an answer that makes me noble. I can't. I'm not comfortable raising another man's child, especially when that man is my brother, the person who spent years convincing me I didn't deserve a life that fit. This isn't a stepdad story. I was presented with a son and asked to love him as my own. I did, without reservation. Then the truth moved the ground under my feet, and I chose not to pretend the earth hadn't shifted. Maybe I'll feel different a decade from now. Time has a way of building bridges where we thought there was only water. For now, I know my limit. Refusing contact isn't mercy, but it's honest. And sometimes, honest is the only clean thing left. As for David, he still circles the family's perimeter. He knocks occasionally by proxy through relatives, mutual friends, comments under photos where mom is tagged. He's learned that direct access is gone. Maybe that's the start of his growth. Maybe he'll build a life that doesn't feed on other people's certainty. Maybe not. The point is, it's not my project anymore. I keep the paternity envelope in a box with other documents you don't display. Not as a weapon. As a record of the day, I stopped telling myself a story that didn't line up with the facts. When I open that box once a year to file taxes or insurance renewals, I see it and feel two things at once: grief for what I lost, and gratitude for the boundary that let me stop losing more. On Sundays, I call my father to confirm our tea time. He always answers on the second ring and says, "You bringing your cursed putter?" I tell him yes, because part of loving someone is letting them rewrite a little of your history together into a joke you both enjoy. I don't know if I'll remarry. I don't know when I'll date. I know I'm learning to live without auditioning for roles I didn't choose: good son, solid husband, peacemaker, loser, victim. I'm learning how to be a man who knows the sound a vault makes when it closes and understands that the sound is tender, not harsh. It protects what matters. It keeps out what doesn't. If you've read this far, thank you. People like to say stories like mine are shocking, but shock is just the top layer. Under it is something simpler, the math of cause and effect. My brother wanted what was mine and took it. My wife wanted what wasn't hers and kept it. I wanted a life that didn't require me to disappear. We all got exactly what those choices earn. If you want more true stories about messy families and the boundaries that save them, you know what to do. Subscribe and hit the bell. I'll be here, steady, trying to tell the truth, one clean line at a time.